Testing. Well, this is a big audience. It's wonderful. And you're going to like Phil Ford. He's not boring. He will have something to say of great interest. And I'm thanking y'all for coming for both the library committee and also Pathway to Wellness. And it was Georgia Brown who did all the work to get Phil here. And so special thanks to her. He's our speaker, Phil Ford. Did I say Brown all along? Phil Ford. And he will, when you get older, you just don't know what your brain's going to do. And Phil's going to explore the real events that happened and inspired a fiction. And as you well know, today's book is House is on Fire. We have multiple copies of it in the library if you have not already read it. Now, also on Wednesday of this week, there's a tour from Cedarville to go to Monumental Church up on Broad Street. It's the site of the fire. And it was an Episcopal minister. I think it still is an Episcopal church, but just not functioning anymore. I'm going, and here's the point of me raising this. There are about 10 spaces on the list in the mailroom. And if you want to go ahead and sign up, because George has said that Catherine doesn't even check the list until tomorrow. And so I think you really might want to go. I think I've gone a lot in the past to show visitors, but I've never had a guided tour that I expect like we'll have tomorrow. So the fiction that we have plenty of copies of in the library was written by Rachel Beanland, who is a native, and during the COVID pandemic, she researched and researched and researched this, and I think it's brilliantly researched. Now, it is a fiction, so she has the right to mess up some facts. You have to be suspicious of historical novels. But I think hers is one of the legit historical novels, really. I hope you agree. It is The Great Fire of 1811 in Richmond, which became one of the first worldwide, nationwide disasters in our U.S. history, 1811. And you will, when you read the book, and if you are a Richmonder or even lived in Richmond for a while, you will recognize a lot of family names. And Phil worked for the Henrico County Public Library, and he's worked for over 20 years there. And he is going to do another of these series on a book here at Cedarville when it's cold and icy, so that we can learn. And some of y'all will really be interested in the Franklin expedition. And that occurred in the 1840s, where you had an attempt to find the Northwest Passage. And what they found was they were missing all the boats. All the ships went down, did something. And it was unknown until more recent history exactly what happened. So there is a book for historians here called The Terror by Dan Simmons. It's a big book, and I know the Henrico Library has a copy or two. Any of y'all want to buy it and donate to the library, it's always accepted. And Dan has won multiple awards for doing this kind of presentation. And he's a man of many talents. He's a writer, a columnist, a musician. His articles have appeared in anthologies and magazines such as Dark Ink Press, Richmond Magazine, and Makeout. And he also is a DJ on WRIR 97.3, and that's called the Friday Clock Out from 5 to 7 on Friday clock out. So we've got ourselves an interesting speaker today, and I'll give it to you.
Can you guys hear me okay? Good. How many of you guys think, how many people here do you think? I'm just wondering if anybody knows. 72, okay, I was just curious. All right, I'm gonna see if I can get this working here. I'm gonna be reading a lot from my notes because that's what I've been doing is the research on this. How many have read the book by Rachel Beanland called The House is on Fire? Excellent. How many know a little bit about the history of the Richmond Theater fire? And you are absolutely correct. It was like a modern day disaster that you would witness that just shook the world when it happened. Let's see, there we go. So at the height, let me just read a little bit about the story of the book itself, the fictional piece. It's the height of winter during the social season in Richmond, Virginia, 1811. And the General Assembly is in session, and many of Virginia's gentlemen planters, along with their wives and children, have made the long journey to the Capitol in hopes of whiling away the darkest days of the year at the city's only theater on the night after Christmas, Boxing Day. It's a packed theater with more than 600 holiday revelers. In the third floor, their boxes sits the newly widowed Sally Campbell, who was glad for any opportunity to relive the happy time she shared with her husband. One floor away in the slave gallery, Cecilia Patterson is grateful for a 4-hour reprieve from a life that has recently gone from bad to worse. Backstage, there's a young stagehand named Jack Gibson hopes that if he can impress the theater's managers, he'll be offered a permanent job with the company. And on the other side of town, blacksmith Gilbert Hunt dreams of one day being able to bring his wife to the theater, but he'll have to buy her freedom first. When the theater goes up in flames in the middle of the performance and the days following the fire, as news of the disaster spreads across the United States, the paths of these four people will become forever entwined. Now, that's quite a sell for a book, right? So Beanland wrote the book in record time during the pandemic. She started around April of 2020, and it was published by July. The book that she had been planning on was an international book that required travel and airfare and all this other stuff, but we all know everything was shut down during the pandemic. Flights were grounded and everything was at a standstill. So she was not going to be able to write the kind of book using the research that she wanted to do for that one. So she started thinking about what she could write that was set in her own backyard here in Richmond, Virginia. And the Richmond Theater fire, of course, was a natural choice. She says she learned about it the first day she moved to Richmond and had always been fascinated with the story, as many of us probably are. Bean thought long and hard how she would capture this tragedy because the fire had affected such a cross-section of Virginians. She wanted to document the full range of experience because not only did we have slaves, but we also had the upper class there too. But let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about theater in America. Before the first English colony was established in 1607, there were Spanish dramas and Native American tribes that often performed theatrical events. And although theaters were built in places like Williamsburg, Virginia in 1716 and Dock Street Theater in Charleston, South Carolina, the birth of professional theater in the English colonies may have begun when Lewis Hallman, the man in the middle, arrived with his theatrical company in Williamsburg in 1752. Lewis and his brother William were the first to organize a complete company of actors in Europe and bring them to the colony. So Virginia has a lot of firsts, but theater company was not one that I imagined, honestly. However, in New England and the states up there, Puritanism had crystallized, forming a solid front against temptation and sin. Massachusetts Puritans had come from England at a time when their ministers had condemned the theater from the pulpit and in print due to their obscenities. which were usually in theater dramas, right? They concluded that playhouses were responsible for emptying the churches, causing God to visit the plague upon London, corrupting maidens and chaste wives, and providing a marketplace for harlots and their customers. The theater was denounced as a bastard of Babylon, the snare of filthy lusts of wicked whoredom, and a chapel of Satan. Anybody been to the theater before? Oh, okay. So there were laws forbidding the performance of plays that were passed in Massachusetts in 1750, and in Pennsylvania in 1759, and in Rhode Island in 1761. And as a side note, plays were also banned in most states during the American Revolutionary War at the urging of the Continental Congress. But as the years went by, that resistance to theater was gradually being worn down everywhere except in New England, where Puritan convictions remained firm. Only Virginia and Maryland never enacted legislation prohibiting the theater, and it was in Virginia that the theater was able to gain a foothold in America. I guess we are some sinning Virginians and Marylanders in here. So, Richmond Theater. The first Richmond Theater was established in 1786, and it was intended not only to be a theater, but a school, a museum, and an art gallery housed collectively under the name of the Academy of Fine Arts and Sciences of the United States, also known as Quisney's Academy. So Richmond Theater at the time kind of looked like this. It's kind of an outline on the left there. The idea for this organization originated with the French scholar and soldier Chevalier Alexandre Marie Quesnay de Bonapierre, who had come, you can't say that fast 5 times, folks. I don't know how many times you want to do it. But he'd come for the United States in March of 1777 to fight the American Revolutionary War. Quesnay intended to create an American organization modeled after the French Academy of Sciences, also known as the National Institute of Sciences and Arts. So Quesnay's dream of an institution mirrored that of the French, but it was short-lived. Social prejudices against the morality of the theater made operations challenging, and he was forced to publicly make it clear that there was separation between the scholars studying at the academy and the visiting theater troops utilizing the theater. So there was some, puritanical sentiment still in Virginia. It just wasn't made into law or anything. Eventually, the theater managers, Thomas West and John Bignell, took over the academy and made significant alterations to its theater, and they renamed it the Richmond Theater. And at this time, Academy Square over here on the left with the French gardens, doesn't it look like it probably was very dreamy and nice, just nice little gardens to walk through with your actor friends or whatever. But they called that, instead of the Academy, they called it the Theater Square. Also, the Virginia Ratifying Convention of 1788 was held in this building beginning on June 2nd and was there for 3 days. And among the individuals in attendance were James Madison, John Marshall, James Monroe, George Wythe, George Mason, Richard Henry Lee, and Patrick Henry. West and Bignell continued to operate this theater as such until it was destroyed by fire in January of 1798. So they decided to rebuild. The second theater was built on the same site and was erected through the advocacy of John Marshall, who was serving as Chief Justice of the United States, and he was from Richmond. Through Marshall's efforts, funds to build this theater were raised, and construction began in 1804. The new theater was made from brick instead of totally wood, so it was brick on the outside, and stood 3 stories high. It opened January 25th of 1806, and was referred to in the Richmond Inquirer as both the New Theater and the Richmond Theater. It was financially profitable during its 5-year history. And this over here is pretty much the size of the theater. 90 feet long. That can't be right. It's got to be 900 feet. It's pretty huge. It's not as big. This is a pretty good estimate right here. This room you're in right now is a little shorter, but if you go a little longer and you put box seats on the side, you can pretend like you're in the Richmond Theater, okay? But you don't have to worry. I think the sprinkler systems is very safe right now. Let's go to slide 8 here. So let's talk a little bit about the troupe and the play at the time. The troupe was called the Placide and Green Company. It was a very popular troupe from Charleston, South Carolina, and had been in town since October. The company was comprised of 15 men, 6 women, 3 girls, and 2 boys who performed 2 of the 3 evenings a week near the Capitol and kept Richmond entertained with an impressive 45 different plays ranging from Macbeth and Othello to Blackbeard the Pirate. That's a lot of memorization of lines. Alexander Placide, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, was talented in dance and pantomime, while his wife, also a member of the troupe, was very talented as an actress and a singer. Their run in Richmond during 1811 had been quite successful until they suffered the loss of one of their troupe members, Elizabeth Arnold Poe. Elizabeth, or Liza Poe, was a heralded actress for the day. Over the course of her career, she played some 300 parts, as well as dancing and choir roles, including Shakespeare's actor Juliet Capulet and Ophelia. She was 23 or 24 when she died, leaving 3 children behind, one of them the famous author Edgar Allan Poe. Despite this troupe setback, they proceeded ahead with the last leg of their tour in Richmond. Now, there's Eliza in the middle. The lower right there, you're probably like, what's this? Is just a building. That is the building where she was living and where she died at the time, which is, for any of you, it was on Main Street, like where the little grocery store is, kind of in that little block, and also a reason why she may have been buried at St. John's Church. If you ever go to St. John's Church, there's a memorial plaque for her. They're not quite sure where she is buried, but they think in that general vicinity. So I think it's kind of really nice. And she's so tiny in that picture, that rendition of her. But anyway, the show must go on, as they say. So the performance of the evening of December 26th, 1811 was a benefit for Alexander Placide and his daughter. The program was a double billing. First, a play by Dennis Diderot entitled The Father, or Family Feuds, followed by a pantomime entitled Raymond and Agnes, or The Bleeding Nun. The benefit originally had been scheduled for the 23rd of December, but was postponed due to the death of Eliza and his own illness, and there was some pretty foul weather, some snow and stuff was going on. And it being Christmas time and the last opening of the season, the auditorium on December 26th was packed, and with a bunch of excited audience members. There were 598 people. 518 were adults. 80 of them were children to view the pantomime, which commenced immediately after the first play was finished. And then tragedy struck. The fire started after the first act of the pantomime, when the chandelier was lifted toward the ceiling with the flame still lit. The lamp became entangled in the cords and used to lift the chandelier, and it touched one of the items used in the front scenes, which caught fire. As soon as the boy worker who was operating the cord saw the flames, he fled the building. He just ran. I know. No yelling fire from him. The flames rose up to the suspended scenery, because in plays, the sceneries are up top. There were 35 of those hanging scenes, the paints were used were basically oils, so very flammable stuff. So they started catching from one scene to the other, and then in addition to the hangings, there were also the borders that provided the outlines for the building and the skies on the outside, among other set pieces which were up there. These two caught fire sequentially. Pine planks that were fixed over rafters and had no plastering also helped fuel the flame. So if you could just imagine this big tinder box in the back just starting and heating up, like a fireplace almost. These planks eventually fell from the ceiling and the fire spread extremely rapidly. And the impact of fire was worsened because the stage curtain hid the initial flames from the audience. So they had no idea what was going on back there. The theater had 3 exits, as you can see over here on the right. We had the little-known side door, which was used by those in the orchestra and the back stage, while the upper balcony exit was a clear way out, separate stairs to the gallery. In the panic of the fire, many people were pushed and fell, and they were unable to escape. Many people jumped out of the windows, because it's 3 stories high. It was a rough night. So let's talk a little bit about some of the victims that night. Governor George William Smith, the 17th governor of Virginia, sworn in April of the same year. Governor Smith had originally reached safety, but then he went back into the fire and died trying to find his young son. The governor's sudden and unexpected death left the Virginia executive branch in turmoil, prompting acting Governor Peyton Randolph to push the legislature to appoint a successor swiftly. James Barber was voted in by the legislature in February of 1812, who originally ran against him during the election. So I don't know, maybe there's something weird about that. I don't know. In the middle is Benjamin Botts, best remembered as one of the defense attorneys who successfully defended Aaron Burr during his infamous treason and conspiracy trial. Botts was a Dumfries native and rising star in Virginia's legal community. He was with his wife and her niece and stayed with his wife while a lot of the crowd passed by in confusion, perishing in the flames. So he stayed with his wife till the end, basically. On the right is Abraham Venable, and he was a Virginia lawyer, planter, and politician who served in the U.S. House of Representatives and briefly a U.S. Senator, as well as the Virginia House of Delegates. A friend of Thomas Jefferson's, he helped found and became president of the Bank of Virginia. So if any of you all were members of the Bank of Virginia, he was the first president of that. He was in one of the boxes with the ladies as they tried to escape toward a window. Smoke rolled in, and many were thrown out, and some fell out of the window. But when all of that commotion was happening, he fell back into the flames. But the most famous this is the story of Sally Conyers and Lieutenant James Gibson. Much has been told and romanticized for decades of the romance and tragedy surrounding these two in relation to the theater fire. Sarah Conyers, also called Sally, was raised by Joseph Gallego, a wealthy Spanish flour merchant, and his wife Mary Gallego, who were sometimes referred to as her uncle and her aunt. There's a Richmond Inquirer article in January of 1812 that captured some of Sally's personality in a detailed memorial. And I'm going to read some of that right now. With her, we have been deprived of one of our fairest flowers of Virginia in the sprightly morning of its youth. Her opinions were perhaps too refined for the world we dwell in. There was a feeling melody in her voice. She was very fond of polite literature and was acquainted with French, Spanish, and Italian languages. She possessed a sweet-souled piety and genuine benevolence. Lieutenant James Gibbon of the U.S. Navy was a veteran of the Revolutionary War and was captured in Philadelphia and spent the rest of the war in Tripoli as a prisoner. Some stories of this tragic romance say that he told his sister of a bad dream he had had the night before, kind of a premonition. A dream where he was standing before a closed door about to enter, but some nameless horror kept telling him to keep back. The door slowly opened, and he went in and found himself in a large hall, dark and empty. There he saw a man's face standing out of the darkness, illuminated by a lurid light. All else was dark, but the man's eyes were fixed on him. Gibson also begged his sweetheart, Sally, not to go to the theater that night. I guess this dream was messing him up pretty good, and only joined later in the evening. At the theater that night, James Gibbon went to his parents' box, and then he left the theater, not, however, before he saw Sally and gave her a little smile. So they both smiled at each other. When the cry of fire, fire, the house is on fire, was given, Sally stood looking for James. Mr. Gallego urged Mrs. Gallego to leave the theater at once, but she wanted to find something she had lost. Meanwhile, James, who had left the theater, had gone over to Capitol Square, but when the alarm was given, he rushed back into the building. He found Mrs. Gallego with Sally when the fire was breaking out. Sally had sunk motionless below, and they were helping her. They headed toward the stairs till James told the rest of them to go, and he would help Sally alone. Tragically, Mrs. Gallo also perished in the fire. And the next day, 2 bodies were found clasped together in a loving embrace. They were burned beyond recognition, but they were identified through the items they were wearing that evening. And this is from the Richmond Enquirer, again, very romanticized. How he reached her, no one knows, but the next day in the ruins, their bodies were found clasped in each other's arms. He was identified by his navel buttons, and she by the necklace which her lover's sister had clasped on her beautiful neck. That's some Richmond romance, right? Tragic romance right there, right? She's so cute in that picture, isn't she? I was a little, oh my gosh. I can't wait to see who plays her in the movie, right? So let's talk about some of the heroes that night. There's John G. Jackson, a member of the United States representative from Virginia, and later a Virginia district judge who was overcome with smoke and disoriented. And he descended the level to the orchestra pit where there was a strong breeze of fresh air. He got to his feet with a woman clinging to him, asking for help. He struggled through and he found the side door and emerged with her just before the roof tumbled in. There's another gentleman whose picture we do not have, M.W. Hancock, and he went to the play with his niece, 2 women and 3 boys. When the alarm went off, he did everything he could to save them, but was separated as the flames approached. Then, with all the bustle and confusion, he attempted to reach a center window and stepped through, pausing at the window with the fresh air, which helped give him the energy to save the folks he was with in the end. Might be made up, I don't know. Maybe. A lot of people were saying they were there when they weren't there, too. And here's another great figure. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Peter Francisco. His nickname was Peter Giant Francisco. He's kind of a tall tale guy. He's a Portuguese-born American blacksmith and soldier best known for his service in the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. He was in attendance that evening and assisted those fleeing the disastrous fire. One of the women he rescued stated that he caught at least 30 other people who were jumping from windows and then carried them to safety. Peter asked that his name be omitted from the list of those who aided in rescuing people from the flames, saying that he had only done what he could under the circumstances. Francisco is a notorious tall tale hero from the Revolutionary War, so his participation in the rescue probably is a bit exaggerated. But the most famous one of all, to anyone, is the story of Gilbert Hunt and Dr. James McCall. Gilbert was born enslaved at Piping Tree, a tavern in King William County, 20 miles northeast of Richmond, around 1780. At some point, Hunt accompanied the tavern keeper's daughter to Richmond. There he was trained as a blacksmith and was sold at least twice over the next few decades, but remained in Richmond. By 1811, Hunt had a wife who was a domestic servant for Elizabeth Carrington Mayo Preston, a Richmond native who had recently married General John Preston, the treasurer of Virginia. Dr. James Drew McCall was the son of Scottish immigrants and received his medical degree from the University of Edinburgh in 1792, and soon thereafter established himself in Richmond as a leading physician. Among his patients was the noted legal scholar George Wythe, who James attended to after Wythe's poisoning in 1807. for any of you that don't know the George Wythe poisoning story, there's a great book called I Am Murdered, which talks about how his nephew basically tried to kill him, and it worked. Okay. But it also backfired, so that's a really interesting story. But, sorry, let me go back to this. On the evening of, let's see what time we got. We're doing good. On the evening of December 26, 1811, Hunt walked to his wife's quarters after attending the First Baptist Church, which is an integrated congregation at the corner of College and H, which is now called Broad Street. Soon after arriving home, Hunt later recalled, "I was startled by the cry that the theater was on fire." His wife's mistress told Hunt that her daughter, Louisa Mayo, was at the theater. Louisa was then about 17 and had taught Hunt to read. Out of concern, he raced to the theater, and when he arrived, he saw people hurling themselves out of windows and ran to the nearby home of Cy Gilliat, an African-American fiddler and a friend of his. He asked Gilliat to lend him a mattress to cushion the fall from the fire victims, but Gilliat refused for some reason, and Hunt recalled that he then got a stepladder and placed it against the wall of the burning building. Above him, Dr. McCall broke out the second-floor window and yelled for Hunt to catch women as he dropped them down. McCall and Hunt together saved about a dozen women, including the doctor's sister, and when Dr. McCall finally jumped, he severely injured his leg, and according to Hunt and contemporary historians, Hunt took him to safety just before the building toppled. Dr. McCall still had a limp all his life as a result of that. Also, just to do this right here, we're getting to totals here. 72 people perished that night. Overwhelmingly, they were young women, teenagers, or mothers from higher walks of life. In some papers and personal letters, it was reported that nearly all the men that died were ones trying to save the women and children. Every 2 out of 3 victims were female, which threw into question the gallantry of Virginia men. So one of the big problems that the theater had, as you could tell by that image, was they only had one real exit, right? Those double doors in the front. And yelling theater in a fire is not a good idea. And as you know, everybody pushed and pushed to where they were toppling and suffocating over each other, trampling over people until the stairs collapsed that were from the upstairs onto people, making it impossible for people to get out, as well as creating this debris field toward the exit. So it was impossible. It was very traumatic. And if you can imagine the clothes that you had to wear in 1811, pretty restrictive, you can't move around unless you're like this, right? So 54 women, 18 men. This right here, this image by Benjamin Tanner, is based on first-person descriptions in February 1812 is when this came out. So every image on here is something that somebody witnessed seeing. And they call it a aquatent, where it's like everything is put that they remember the bucket brigade over there, people hauling other people, the way that people fell out. That's all very true to what the eyewitness accounts testified. So let's talk a little bit about the aftermath. You think they're going to have theater anymore after that night? You think the puritanical effects are going to come in? Probably. In the days after the fire, the city's Common Council established committees to count and bury the dead, fundraise for a memorial, and investigate the fire's cause. The theater company's Alexander Placide argued publicly that an arsonist had set the fire, and Delegate Tom Joines had speculated at the moment that slaves had torched the theater as part of an insurrection, which is silly. It had only been 11 years, however, since Gabriel's rebellion. Is anybody familiar with the Gabriel story here in Richmond? Fascinating story. And so it was an uprising where they were going to kill the governor or kidnap the governor, and they were going to get a ship and get out of there. It didn't happen because people told, and it was really bad weather that night, the night they were doing it. But those rumors of the slave uprisings persisted in and around Richmond because it wasn't that long ago. But Joines finally came to his senses and later wrote, "There is now no doubt that these fears were groundless. If there had been any intention of that kind, it would have been carried into effect when the flames were at their height and all the inhabitants were collected there." See, so it's just kind of an absurd thought. The burial committee, meanwhile, determined that the bodies could not and should not be removed from the site of the theater. On December 29th, a funeral procession winded its way through the city, along the way picking up coffins of victims who had died from the effects of their injuries later on, and it ended with an interment ceremony at the burn site officiated by the Episcopal minister John Buchanan. On New Year's Day, services were held throughout Richmond, including the state capitol. The investigative committee issued its findings on December 31st, just 5 days after the blaze, and fully exonerated the theater company of any wrongdoing, rather than pointed to negligence in allowing a lit candle to be raised. The committee faulted the design and construction of the theater, maybe because it went up so fast. Meanwhile, the puritanical element across the country had a somewhat told you so field day in regards to their Chapel of Satan mantra when it came to theaters. Articles were published using this tragedy as a way to bring folks back to the pews. One article which was called Remarks of the Theater and on the Late Fire at Richmond in Virginia, which was released in 1812, ends with this: "With the downfall of idolatry and the evacuation of all the playhouses now existing in the realms of Christendom, may these haunts of vice and dissipation be consecrated to the salutary purposes of adoration and worship of the sovereign Lord of the universe." It's an interesting read. It is. I have a book that I ordered that has that, as well as the Richmond Enquirer, like eyewitness kind of stuff. It's really interesting, especially the way it's written. And that's some of the, in case you can see that. So, Chief Justice Marshall, again, commissioned a church to replace it as a monument. And it was designed by architect Robert Mills, who was the first American-born architect. He was the architect of the Washington monuments in both Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Mills had a reputation for being particularly concerned with fireproofing. So they're going to make sure to get a building that didn't catch on fire. So Mills' plan consisted of an emphatic monumental porch, as you can see in the last picture, right there, all around. So it's 32-foot square, grafted onto an auditorium-style church. The body of the church is an octagon, and within the church, the pulpit stands directly across from the entry doorway. And when you guys tour the stuff, they're going to tell you way more about it than I'm going to tell you right now. So I'm just letting you know there's going to be a lot more meat and potatoes there. There's also a hidden window that produces a special lighting effect thrown down on the speaker, much like modern stage lighting or lights as an actor on stage. So at that pulpit, there's a window that shines the light. So when the preacher's preaching, you know, eyes of God upon him. The overall effect of the building was of a geometrically proportioned and balanced structure. So it gave it a sense of serenity and a sense of peace in it. Symbols of mourning can be seen on both the interior and exterior of the church, such as the upside down torches. Can you guys see those on the columns over there on the right? Which represent life extinguished or snuffed out, and the stars equaling heaven and eternity in reference to the Christian belief in life after death. And then there's drapery representing funeral drapery or burial shrouds, as well as laurels, which is a symbol for victory and eternity. And just below all of this are the 72 victims, which are still buried in the crypt below. So they have not moved them since. And that's a commemoration, I think that happened in 2011 from a news article there. They're still there. The building was completed in 1814, and in 1817, The Monumental Church established the first Sunday school program in Richmond. Famous parishioners included Chief Justice John Marshall, whose family occupied pew number 23, Edgar Allan Poe, whose foster parents, the Allens, were members and occupied pew number 80, and then Marquis de Lafayette, when he visited Richmond in 1824, also took service there. 3 Richmond congregations were formed from the Monumental, including St. James in 1831, St. Paul's in 1845, and All Saints in 1888. As the center of population in the city dispersed to the suburbs, however, the Monumental Church was judged too costly to operate and was deconsecrated in 1965 and taken over by the Medical College of Virginia for classroom space, so you could take a class there. The college transferred the building to the historic Richmond Foundation, an affiliate of the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities. In 2004, Monumental Church underwent a significant renovation. A monument to the 72 people killed in the fire was replaced by an exact replica, which is that urn right there in the middle there. And in 2006, regular tours began. These are operated in cooperation with the Valentine Richmond History Center, and the building is open on occasion for other private functions, most consistently during the Valentine's Winter Wander event of December of every year, where they open up a lot of these buildings for free tours and everything, which is really lovely. It's a nice little event. So we have anybody have any questions or anything? No? I have some recommended reading, by the way, over here. This book, The Richmond Theater Fire, Early America's First Great Disaster, by Meredith Baker, is bar none the best nonfiction book you're going to read about that. If you're really interested in it, amazing. And it came out just before, and Rachel Beanland, they're buddies. So she got a lot of good research. You were talking earlier, she definitely got some good research about that. And then, so there's that one, and we also have some great books like Virginia Stabney's Richmond, The Story of a City, probably your classic go-to. I have copies available here, only 10, however, but George is happy to make some more copies if you want a copy of this slide. There's also Greg Kimball, who works for the Library of Virginia, and he does a lot of great music programs as well. I would recommend him here. Did a wonderful book called American City, Southern Place, about antebellum Richmond at the time. There's older books called Poe's Richmond. There's smaller books like The Historic Disasters of Richmond by Walter Griggs. And if you want some more spooky-sided tales, we have The Ghosts of Richmond by L.B. Taylor, who does those Ghosts of Virginia series. And then Whispers of Rebellion, I recommend this book, great. It's narrating Gabriel's Conspiracy by Michael Nichols. Just a really great, thorough book and explanation of Gabriel's Rebellion, a fascinating history of Richmond and basically the United States as a whole. We have some good fiction, too, called The Reservoir, which is more of a murder mystery based on a true story that happened in Richmond in 1885. Just trying to give you some more Richmond stuff because I love Richmond and I feel like you guys probably should too. Come August, Come Freedom by Gigi Amato is a young adult book about the Gabriel's Rebellion, but it's a very, very well written, great adult book too. Also Howard Owen, who has written a number of hard-boiled detective series set in Richmond, but his first one's Oregon Hill, which is a really good one of the Richmond hardboiled detective stories. And then we have short stories. One's called Richmond Noir, which is a short story noir anthology by Richmond authors such as Dean King, Anne Sophie, and Howard Owens. Also Richmond Macabre, if you want ghost stories. There's a series edited by Beth Brown and myself. And it's just horror anthologies with authors such as Dale Brumfield, Michael Graybon, Melissa Scott Sinclair. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much for listening to me speak for 40 minutes.
Well, will you tell, testing, will you tell everybody in the room more about how the bookmobile works and how
sure.
you could order any one of these books?
Right. We're here, is it the first Tuesday, or no? First Tuesday of every month. I think it was last week. Yeah, which was the first. So we're here the first Tuesday of every month between 1 and 2 p.m. down. I don't know what that part of the building is called, how you got, where we're at. Georgia, what's that section where we go?
It's called Parkview First Floor.
Parkview First Floor?
And it's in that little lobby in front of, beside the chip fireplace.
Right, and I'll tell you the next date will be there if you guys are interested. But if you do not have a Henrico Library card, we are happy to get you one right then and there. And if there's enough interest here today, we can even give Georgia some applications. We can send her some ahead of time, so that way you can fill them out. The next time we're going to be there is August the 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. And we have mostly a lot of fiction, but we have great nonfiction and stuff too. But we're happy to, like she said, if you have a book that you want to get that we can get for you, we will bring it to you.
And we have something posted in the library about the phone number and all that kind of thing. And Georgia just whispered to me that you have to sign up to go to the Monumental by tomorrow morning.
And there's 6 spots.
6, okay. Yeah,
That's pretty competitive for 72 people right here. Wait, did you say there were 72 people in here?
yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, okay, I'm glad that number moved up because we're in a space very similar, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Well,
Boy, we dodged that one, guys, right?
I know a story about that. Don't have a nightmare tonight, because one of our temporary council, what do you call them? You know, head knockers here, who led us, like Amy. We were in this very room, and we were talking about fire safety. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about fire. You're going to drown first." Because we have a hell of a system. Sorry. I have one question. Mr. Hunt Gabriel, who's one of the heroes in American history and in Virginia history, a slave who caught people, I can't talk, who leapt to their deaths or safety if he caught these ladies. And was he ever granted his freedom?
Yes, it took a while. He needs a bigger biography because he's a very interesting person in history. He was born a slave, and then this kind of gave him some notoriety, and it also, in this weird, like, it's an awkward time for that, you know, it's just awful. But he bought his freedom, then he went to Africa because that's what we wanted to do, and I forget exactly where he went, but it was this township in Africa that welcomed ex-slaves who went there. Yes, and then I think he got sick of it, and he came back. And he was like a deacon for some of the local church here. There is some controversy about him, like he was cranky and very like mean to other people and stuff in his older life. Now that picture that I showed you there, it's so weird because he was in his probably 20s or 30s when the actual rescue happened. So it wasn't this, it wasn't this older gentleman that was catching 120-pound women jumping out 99 on a good day, right? But a younger man doing this. And this is actually from later in his life, obviously. And he took great pride in being a blacksmith. And you can tell by that he's holding one of the tools of blacksmithery right there. But he wrote, or he had written, or they wrote together, co-wrote at the time, a brief biography of his life. And that's, I think, available maybe through Library of Congress and stuff like that. It's like one of those thin pamphlets, much like Billy the Kid's Tale or all these other kind of stories, where he documented, according to him, a lot of his life. So he got his freedom. He was a free black man in the States. I believe he died right before the Civil War, maybe in the 50s, if I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure of that. But yeah, he lived a very interesting life afterwards, but he was involved with the church when he came back again. So, yeah.
And I know we have at least one relative whose grandfather, somebody, was Mayor Mayo
Oh,
in this room. But was this niece who was in,
Louise,
was she
Louisa,
Mayor?
she passed
Mayo's?
away too in the fire.
She did.
Mm-hmm.
No. That's one of the things. Sound like it's coming back. Yeah, it's so interesting. If you are a Richmonder or you have lived in Richmond a long time, you really hear names that you're used to hearing, and I think the familiarity it is interesting in books when you hear the place names. I'm from Atlanta, so when my mother used to hear anybody mention Peachtree Street, we were in tears, and we remembered every alley of Peachtree Street, and I'm sure Richmonders do that, and Cincinnatians and others.
Mayo Island, Mayo Bridge. There's like so many things that are named after. Randolph's was a classic Virginia family as well. So, and
Yeah.
there were people involved there.
And does anybody know a little bit more about Edgar Allan Poe's mother's death? Because my memory of going on a tour at St. John's was across from St. John's, sort of on that little street where the Catholic Church is. They had done some excavation to restore a building, and they found this woman's body underneath the steps. And it was identified as his mother, Edgar Allan Poe's mother. And then St. John's refused burial within the site of the walls of St. John's because she had been an actress. And thus, if she was an actress, she was a lady of the evening probably. And that's what I heard. And there is a plaque at St. John's to her, recognizing her existence.
Yeah, and another curious thing is her husband, Edgar Allan Poe's father, died just a few short weeks after she died, which left them 3 children with no place to go, and they basically split all 3 of them up. Where Edgar Allan Poe lived with the Allan families here, which was a distant relative. Where I always like to think that there's another fascinating thing called Shockoe Creek, which used to be a significant creek in Richmond that ran down by 17th Street. And that's the reason why it always flooded down there, was because the creek rose. But since they built that flood wall down there, it really doesn't do that anymore. But somebody needs to write a story on Shockoe Creek because it was a Native American fishing area. Edgar Allan Poe actually learned to swim there, which is kind of interesting too.
And you have we were talking about the I've forgotten the name of it, Franklin expedition, but you do, Phil, have another book review like this, just programmed just like this on whom?
It's on Lizzie Borden, so if any of you guys are into the Lizzie Borden story, I'm reading a couple of books about that thick. There's a fictional book called See What I Have Done that this is going to be based off of. But this is another subject that's very fascinating to me. Did she do it? It's really hard to say, but she got off, so it's pretty interesting. And so, yeah, my family and I, this is kind of a twofold thing. We went up to Newport, Rhode Island, where actually Connecticut Mystic, the Seaport Museum there, was doing a exhibition of the artifacts that they recovered from the Franklin expedition. So I was like, we're going for spring break, kids. Guess what? I don't care if you think this is boring or not. We're going to go see a bunch of dead ship people here. And so we did that, but we also stopped in Fall River where we toured the Lizzie Borden home where everything happened, which, by the way, is a bed and breakfast. So if you guys are willing to travel and sleep in the same room, you can.
Well, do we have any other questions? I have a feeling you could ask a lot of historical questions about Richmond and all. Do you think Virginia Dabney's book on Richmond is pretty legit, or is it a little bit painted by the lost cause?
It's a little lost cause romanticized, but he gets a lot of those early facts really well done. So, Virginia Dabney is a famous in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. He also does had a wonderful book on the Richmond Times-Dispatch and VCU too, I think. But he's a kind of a go-to to dip your feet. It's a little older, the book is, but yeah, I would recommend Greg Kimball's book on a little bit of the antebellum Richmond, called Southern Place. It's really good, and he's a friend of mine. So
And he's the one you said could be a good speaker.
he would be a good speaker. He also does music history, and he does excellent stuff on some of the old-timey music back in the day, and he even performs with a band called the Ramblers or something like that. So he's an excellent speaker, and he works
the
at the Library of Virginia. So
Well, I'll try to get him as a speaker. Now, which book is, I can't, it's so small. It's Mr. Smith we're trying
his book is American City, Southern Place.
Okay.
But I would, Richmond, Story of a City is a decent book about the early history of the white people coming here to Richmond and how that got started and everything. Very interesting.
Well, any questions? I know we have a bunch of historians in this room, and unless we've done something.
Well, I hope I did okay for you historians.
Oh,
Okay, no, I'm not asking for. I just want to make sure. Correct me if I was wrong.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you so much,
Thank
Phil.
you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Pretty interesting.